Let's begin by seeing how to create a basic class definition in Python, along with how to instantiate the class and then access parts of it. So here in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to go ahead and open up a folder, and I'm going to open my exercise files folder. All right, and then in chapter 1, I'm going to go ahead and open up the definition_start file. So let's go ahead and get started. The class keyword is used to define a new class. So let's go ahead and start there, and I'll make a class called book. Now, you can optionally add parentheses after your class name, but they're only really required if you're going to indicate that the class inherits from another class, and we'll get to that later in the course. So since our class just exists on its own, we can leave those parentheses off. So now to complete the class, I can just add the pass statement in Python, and this is perfectly legal. I mean, this is a syntactically correct class definition. I mean, obviously it doesn't do anything, but I can now create instances of this class simply by calling the class name as a constructor function. So I can write b1 is equal to book, and that will create a book object. In reality, however, our classes will contain methods and data attributes. So let's fill out this class a little bit more. So first, I'm going to delete pass, and I'm going to override the built-in init function. So I'm going to write a function like I normally would, only I'm going to do it as part of a class. And I'm going to override the init function like this, and it takes two arguments. Well, I'm going to give it two arguments called self and title. And then inside this function, I'm going to write self.title is equal to title. All right. So the init function is one of Python's special functions for working with classes. When the class is created, like we see here on line 11, the init function is called to initialize the new object with information, and it is called before any other functions that you've defined on the class. Now, some people mistakenly call this the constructor function because other languages like Java and C# have a similar function that performs a similar purpose. But it's more accurate to say in Python that this is the initializer function and not really the constructor. The object has already been created or constructed when this function is called. So you know it's safe to start initializing attributes. So you can see here that I've passed in an attribute named title. This is going to be one of the arguments to the constructor function. And then there's this other function here named self, and we'll get to that in a little bit. All right. So let's go ahead and update our code to call the book object correctly. So now I need to pass in some titles. So I'll pass in Brave New World, and I'll create another one called War and Peace. All right. So you may have noticed that the init function takes two arguments, but I'm only supplying one when I create each book. And that's because whenever we call a method on a Python object, the object itself gets automatically passed in as the first argument. And the word self, by the way, is just a naming convention. You don't need to call it that, but most Python programs follow this convention. So then inside the init function, you can see that I'm creating a new attribute on the object called title, and it's being used to hold the title of the book. So once I've done this, I can then access the value of this property using dot notation, just like any other object. So first I'll print out b1, and then I'll print b1.title. All right, so let's go ahead and save, and let's run this. Now here in Visual Studio Code, because I have the Python extension installed, I can run this right here in VS Code. Let's go ahead and do that. And you can see that I'm printing out B1, and that's just the name of the book object itself. It's just this little, you can see it's the class name and the memory location where it is. And then you can see the next line prints out the title right here on line 18, and that's this right here. So if you're not using Visual Studio Code, you'll need to run this directly from the command prompt. So let's go ahead and bring up the terminal, and I'm going to go ahead and go into my exercise files folder, which is on my desktop. And we'll go into chapter 1. And then I can just run it directly. I can write Python, and this is called definition _ start. And you can see the same results there. Okay, so that gets us up and running with creating Python classes. In the rest of the chapter, we'll see how to work with other kinds of methods and properties and how to identify classes and objects.